Hi, welcome to my TED Talk called Should We Drive? Gene Drives and Their Implications. I'd like to start off with a photo that I think most of you will be able to identify with. I think we can safely say that we have all been this woman at one part of our lives. We've been a crazed mosquito-killing machine. Anytime one of them came near us in our house or outside, we automatically go into a frenzy and say, I need to kill this mosquito. I need to get it away from me. And while it is funny to see this photo, and it's definitely something relatable, it's an annoying part of human existence. It's mostly just a nuisance in this part of the world. And we have healthcare options that help prevent any health issues that come from interacting with these mosquitoes, and I bring it up because that is not necessarily true of a big portion of the world. Illnesses like malaria, dengue fever, West Nile virus, Zika, just to name a few, mosquito-borne illnesses affect a huge number of people around the world. Just taking a look at malaria alone, 40% of the world's population lives in malaria risk areas, looking at these red areas right here. And malaria kills 1 million people every year, mostly children under the age of 5. And while 90% of those deaths happen in sub-Saharan Africa, everybody in this area is constantly at risk. And that's not something that we're necessarily faced with in this part of the world. And I bring it up because it is an example of a large problem that has been persistently going after human populations inadvertently, but still being a huge problem for humans for many centuries. And I come to you today with a potential solution for that, called gene drives. I don't mean a donation box where you drop off your old denim blues and you send it out to an unknown country in the attempt to give them protection against mosquitoes. Maybe that would work, but I don't think quite as effectively as what I'm about to talk about. I'm talking about an exciting genetic tool that scientists and experts are really thrilled about because it represents a way to address some of the biggest challenges that humans face on a daily basis, and just by making some small adjustments in the world around us. And while that statement right there shows that there's pros and cons to this solution, let's backtrack a little bit and give some background on what I'm talking about. So, as comfortable as it is, I ask you to move back in time and go back to a rather awkward time of all of our lives, middle school. Just breathe through it. It's going to be okay. We're going to get there. Just think past the social awkwardness and the brace face and the chronic acne, and think back to your 7th grade science class. Think back. Do you remember this man's face staring up at you out of your textbook? Probably in your genetics chapter, talking about crazy things like pea plants and green and yellow and genes and all these seemingly insane things. Yeah, well, if you're like me and you've forgotten everything since middle school, I'll give you a quick refresher. This man is called George Mendel, and he is who we call the father of genetics. His research using pea plants, because they reproduce very easily, was revolutionary in how we understand how genes are passed down in different species and how inheritance works, and why a pea that is the product of a green and a yellow pea becomes yellow sometimes and green other times, and how dominant and recessive genes interact with each other and what that means. And that all sounds very sciencey, but basically it has given us a foundation for how we understand how we reproduce. And the background, or the basics, of Mendelian genetics is that you have a male and a female of a certain species. Let's look at pea plants, since that's basically what he did his entire life. They come together to make an offspring, and there is some combination of the genetic codes of both parents that come together, and there's a certain chance that the offspring may be any one of these combinations that comes together. And based on whether a gene is dominant or recessive, or the number of genes that are that type, there's all these different combinations that come together. But basically, there's a lot of chance involved, and there's not a whole lot of control that we or nature or anything really has over the outcome of that interaction, or of that coming together of the genomes. And so that's been a pretty persistent, even though we've had many technological advances, that's been pretty consistent in the study of genetics until very recently, in which we found CRISPR and gene drives. CRISPR is the name of something called a bacterial DNA, and while by itself it's not all that interesting, when you pair it with something called a guide protein, you can think about this as a park ranger trying to lead you through the park to the bathroom, like a specific location. That's basically what the guide protein does for the CRISPR, but it leads it to a direct spot in a chromosome in a species. Say you're going into an organism's genome. It will lead you right to the gene that you want and right on the chromosome that you want, and CRISPR will make a cut right where that guide protein led it to. And that leaves an opening in the chromosome where the CRISPR can then insert something called a gene drive. Now, chromosomes want to be whole, they don't want to be broken, so when they are cut, they try to repair themselves. Normally, they would try to repair themselves with other DNA codes or a new DNA code, but in this case, because CRISPR has inserted the gene drive into the chromosome, it will repair the gene drive into the chromosome genes, and then the gene drive has become a part of the genome. And by doing that, you have essentially altered the genetic makeup of the organism. In this case, it was a mosquito. You can see CRISPR is making the cut here, and then there's a break, and then through the repair, the gene drive, which is here in blue, was able to be inserted into the chromosome and then was replicated into the rest of it. So you can see it's pretty interesting stuff. And then if you think about Mendelian genetics, and you see how parents will come together to make offspring, and sexual relations pass on the genes of different parents, a gene drive is essentially a very selfish gene, and it really wants to express itself. It's like the loud sibling at the Thanksgiving table that won't shut up. It really wants to express itself, and so it will always make sure that it is dominant in the gene interactions between the genomes of two parents who come together to make an offspring. And it will always be expressed. And you can see that here in red. The red is an example of if there's a dominant gene and it's always expressed. The gene drive makes the gene completely dominant within an entire species after enough reproduction has happened. You have one offspring, say a male and a female of the mosquito species, come together, and the male has been visited by CRISPR in the dark of night and has a gene drive in his genome. He mates with the female, and then the offspring both have the gene drive, because the gene drive is really dominant and really wants to express itself, and so it is always expressed. And then these children mate with other non-gene drive mosquitoes, but both of their offspring are still having a gene drive. And so this continues on and on until the entire population has a gene drive in it. And this has huge implications, because a gene drive can be a lot of things. It could be a gene that just affects how, like, the physical traits of an offspring, but it can also affect whether, like, something like a mosquito can carry a disease. So a big implication for the first problem I was talking about earlier is that there can be a gene drive inserted that prevents mosquitoes from being able to carry malaria at all. And so by inserting this gene drive and then nature spreading it through its population and doing its thing, you can make an entire mosquito population unable to carry this virus that has been killing so many people for so long, just from this one intervention in the beginning. And that shows how powerful these gene drives are. And there's many things you can do with these gene drives, not just eradicating viruses. You can make endangered species stronger. You can eradicate invasive species. You can make crops more resilient to drought or pests, or get rid of weeds. You can do a lot of things with it, but with the benefits come the drawbacks, and there has been a lot of pushback with regards to gene drives. And one of the biggest things is how that affects the environment. There's actually been an environmental activism movement led by several prominent scientists, biologists, geneticists, among them big names like Jane Goodall and Vandana Shiva and David Suzuki, who demanded that there be a moratorium placed on even just research of gene drives, not even use, but complete research, a complete moratorium on gene drives. And that would stop them in their tracks and in their eyes, that would be solving the problem. They would no longer be a risk, because in that movement's eyes, and these concerns are certainly valid, interfering with the natural ecosystem that way poses a lot of problems for like an ecosystem. An ecosystem is very interdependent. Nothing in an ecosystem is independent. So if you affect one part of an ecosystem, the other part, there's no way the other part will not be affected. Everything is connected. And so there's a belief there that if you affect one part of an ecosystem, it's going to completely collapse or change or do something to the overall ecosystem. And that is a very valid concern. And a lot of it also comes from that we just don't know a whole lot about gene drives. There hasn't been a whole lot of research yet. It's very new. And even what research we have been doing, there's been evidence of scientific drawbacks and benefits. One of the biggest drawbacks is that we found that gene drives can, or species can actually develop resistance to gene drives. They can, their chromosomes can repair themselves with new DNA bases before the gene drive can be inserted by CRISPR into the cut that it makes. So in doing that, not only does it prevent a gene drive from entering a species in the first place, but it makes the entire species not able to be affected by CRISPR itself, because none of the bases will match up with that specific guide protein and specific CRISPR base pattern that allowed it to make the cut in the first place. And so this population is now no longer able to be affected by gene drives. So a lot of questions are raised here, a lot of ethical and environmental questions are raised. Do we still try to use gene drives and use them for a short period of time before resistance sets in? Or do we completely halt all work on gene drives with the hope that we don't do any lasting damage to the environment? These are the questions that we raise. Do we even have a right to be the people deciding which species get to be altered or eliminated or get to stay the same? There's a lot of implications here, and the underlying, I guess it boils down to this underlying truth in that we just don't know a whole lot, and humans are not very good at dealing with not knowing a whole lot. We tend to fear the unknown, and that's where a lot of fears about gene drives come about from. And those fears are certainly valid, but the potential of gene drives to change people's lives and save lives and solve these problems that are making our world hurt and damaged and unsustainable is certainly something that should be explored. We are not ready as a human race or as a scientific community or as any community to make decisions about the ethical and environmental dilemmas raised by gene drives. We are not in a place to yet because we don't have enough information. So I see the importance of the moratorium, but I see research as being the crucial next step. You're not going to see gene drives in mosquitoes tomorrow, or you're not going to see mutated crops or anything crazy like that tomorrow. The next step is cautious research, proceeding with caution and understanding that with time we will be equipped with more knowledge to be able to make the decisions that we need to figure out, do we want to solve these problems in this way, or is this something that we live with? And as a human species, we are certainly capable of doing that and realizing our own power and how to use that power in a way that doesn't negatively affect all species on this planet. We all share this world together, and we have a responsibility to know what we're doing before we interfere with it. Thank you very much.